Hi, in this video I want to sort of do an introduction to the checklist manifesto. I'm sorry it doesn't necessarily show up clearly on my little video there. But let's start with what we would do to do a full citation of this book. So I've written out here the four items that you usually check with a book. You start off with the author. Now we have to reformulate this. It can't be Atul Gawande, even though Atul is his first name. We start with the last name. So I am going to put his name first, and then after that comes the title of the book. And it's not just the checklist manifesto. It has a subtitle. You can see it right below here in smaller print. And we separate a title with a subtitle with a colon here like this. Also, book titles have to be in italics. We call them containers because they contain chapters. Picador is the publisher. Again, it's easiest to find it just on the spine of the book, but if you look at the title page, you'll find it there too. And then the date of publication is 2010. And I separate Picador, the publisher, and the date with a comma. I have a period to end it. Now, this has only taken up one line. If it takes up more than one line, I need to do hanging indent. Again, for those of you who might not remember, it's you basically move the whole, I'm using Google Docs, you move the whole citation over, and then you bring the first line back to the margin. And it looks the same, but basically what's going to happen if I go beyond the first line, it's going to be indented here. So it's the opposite of a normal paragraph. Now, one thing that I often tell my students is that the checklist manifesto is what I think of as a 5-paragraph essay. And my students are confused because it's obviously more than 5 paragraphs in length. In fact, it's, over almost 200 pages. So how can a 200-page book be a 5-paragraph essay? Well, what do I mean by a 5-paragraph essay? And what I mean is it's really, it's a rhetorical pattern. Okay, it's a pattern of organization which starts with an introduction, has a body, and then has a conclusion. And so let me just talk about that right from the start. The Checklist Manifesto has an introduction, pages I think 1 to 13, if I'm remembering that correctly. If it started on page 1, I think it does. Anyway, in this, it does. In this introduction, Gawande tells a couple stories. Stories are very common hooks that are used in introductions. And then he ends the introduction with what I would say is like a thesis. So this here is the thesis page, if you will, this last part. It's at the end. And he has told 2 stories in this introduction. He's told us that 2 examples in which are 2 medical situations that didn't go well, and it's because they made mistakes, simple mistakes. In one case, a person got stabbed, and they never asked what he got stabbed with, and that would have made a difference on how they treated him, because it was a very small opening, but it was he was stabbed with a bayonet, which is very long, so it did a lot of deep damage. Another case was that a person got the wrong lethal dose of a medication in surgery, and so here's the thesis, if you will. Rather than just read it to you, you can read it yourself on page 13. But basically, he's saying we need to have a strategy that helps us with our knowledge, so that we can overcome, failure, because we have so much knowledge, we don't want to forget things. So in this strategy, he says, is a checklist. And some people might say usually the thesis is the last line of the introduction. it as a checklist is not really a good thesis because you have to say, well, what does it stand for? It stands for this piece underlined here, the strategy for overcoming failure that builds on experience and takes advantage of the knowledge people have and makes up for our inevitable human inadequacies, like that we forget things. The strategy is a checklist. Now, that is a good thesis. It's kind of one of his main points of the book, but it's also not a great thesis because it's I think that he, in the book, realizes that teamwork is a very big, important element to making a team work. Because we're going to see in the next chapter that it's a very complex world, and it's hard to do anything by ourselves, anything large. So that is why that he needs to talk about teamwork, and there's nothing about teamwork really here in this introduction. So, nevertheless, I would still say this book is organized in that introduction, body, conclusion pattern. The rest of the book is about the reason we need checklists, and also on teamwork, which again is not here. But then the final chapter is another story, and it's a story of another mistake that happens. But in this case, a good team was working, they followed a checklist, and in fact, the chapter is called The Save. And they made a save of a man's life that was in surgery because they had worked as a team and they had prepared. So the book as a whole has that 5-paragraph essay, introduction, body, conclusion pattern, and so we would call that a 5-paragraph essay. Again, in an introduction, usually we usually have a hook of some kind, for interest, and in this case we had stories and a thesis, and then the thesis is sort of the main point or argument of an essay. And so his main point is that the checklist is the solution to solving a lot of these problems with complexity. So I'm going over that here because I'm probably not going to make you write a 5-paragraph essay. If you did write a 5-paragraph essay, you'd realize it doesn't necessarily have to be 5 paragraphs because it could be much longer. Or much shorter. It could be, 4 paragraphs probably. That would be the minimum if you wanted to follow that pattern. I suppose you could do it in 3, but nevertheless. All right, I'm going to stop here and make the next video summarizing the next few chapters.